Heyo, welcome back in, you guys, to One Piece chapter 1178, full spoilers. Today, we got a couple of more details about this upcoming chapter of One Piece, but I will say this, though, in advance, for your own sanity, we are pretty much going to be covering a lot of the things we covered yesterday in the brief spoiler video. There's only a few new points here, but generally, the brief spoilers were really all-inclusive this time around. As always, before we get into it, make sure to check out the full spoilers for yourself down below. They'll be in the pinned comment. I'll type it out piece by piece, and it'll be linked over to the source as to where I found them. So now, with all that out of the way, it's time to get into chapter 1178, titled, Waking Up from the Nightmare. It's a crazy title. Who the hell says this? I was hoping that while I was going down the full summary, I was like, okay, somebody's gonna drop this line, but it turns out that Redon and Pew Piece do not mention who says this. And it's like, it's gotta be either Sommers or Killingham, right? Because we see that Sommers gets up in this chapter and he starts recovering, so maybe he's the one saying that Elbaf is a nightmare? Another good candidate as to who could drop this line would simply be Yarl and the Giants of Elbaf, and that's because in this chapter we do see that Elbaf does go back to normal for a while. The fires are put out, domi reversi is over, the God Knights have been seemingly defeated, Emu is gone, so maybe in their opinion, this is waking up from the nightmare, but that might be short-lived. Either way, waking up from the nightmare, chapter 1178, one of the first bullet points we get is that Emu transforms into a black shadow-like body, like what we saw at God Valley with Saturn, and then they use Diabolical Covenant. They stab Luffy and they stab Loki's giant dragon head, and Emu, his dialogue is pretty interesting. He says, "If only thou wouldst disappear from this world, just like Rox did." Brother, it's been 38 years. He's still thinking about Roxy Zabek. "In exchange for even greater power, Mu shall take a portion of thy lifespan. In return, you two look upon each other with hatred." Yes, that is right. Emu wanted to turn Luffy against Loki and Loki against Luffy. And that's really interesting, right? It reminds me of God Valley, where obviously he did this on Rox, and he said, "Hey, Rox, kill the Davy clan and also kill your wife and son." It's like, damn, dude, like these covenants, they get really specific. But that is when we see that domi reversi has no effect on Luffy and Loki. Instead, Luffy's wondering, like, yo, what are you doing? This doesn't even hurt, which is exactly what Roxy Zabek said back in the day. And Loki says, how annoying is this? Also, did you just mention Rox? Emu tries to elaborate as to why this isn't working. As expected, you two, ... And before Emu can give us the lore on why domi isn't working, Luffy and Loki both attack him. Luffy uses a Dawn Gatling, which does, of course, like pierces through Emu's body. And then Loki freezes Emu by using Ragnir. Very unfortunate stuff, man. Like, one of the few times Emu wants to tell us things, we blast him into oblivion. So, as far as why domi reversi isn't working, I've seen a lot of good theories out there. The one I'm currently riding the train of is that it's simply because Luffy and Loki have devil fruits. Maybe because, you know, these devil fruits have a will of their own, they cannot get turned into demons. They're already devils. I think that makes a lot of sense, but we'll see. It is interesting that Emu tried to domi reversi them, even though they knew that it would probably not work. It really looks like Emu was just doing it to see if there's like a 1% chance that this would just all turn out well for him, which is pretty hilarious, man, when you really think about it. So now, because Emu-Gunko are frozen in this block of ice, everything just goes back to normal. We see that everybody around Elbaf is putting out the fires. Chopper turns all the rest of the domi reversi giants back to normal just by hitting them one at a time. And Zoro's explanation as to why Chopper is able to do this is because Chopper is a great doctor. I read that line, and I will admit I did chuckle a little bit, because it's like, Zoro, there's obviously something more going on than that. My voice is correct, too. And yeah, I've seen people saying this last week, like, oh, you know, maybe he cooked up an antibody, you know, maybe he found the cure. It's like, guys, Chopper doesn't even know what he's doing. Chopper was just as shocked as all of us. But of course, who's gonna complain? He is solving the problem, and, good on him for doing that. Hopefully soon we'll realize what's going on. But at this point, I'm gonna be honest, but I don't know who's gonna tell us what's happening with Chopper. Is it going to be Scott Gabon, since he knows the whole lore of the world? Is it going to be Emu? Will Chopper himself figure it out? Or maybe we'll have a sleeper hit with Biblo the Owl telling us what the hell is going on with Chopper. Biblo, gotta remember, he is centuries old and he's currently MIA. Maybe Chopper and Biblo have a little conversation and Biblo drops the lore on us. I hope. We know that Chopper can talk to pretty much any animal out there in the world. So a conversation between Chopper and Biblo, that seems destined to happen, in my opinion. But maybe that's just like animal racism. I guess it's more like a stereotype, right? You see an animal. Oh, of course they know each other. Of course they're going to talk. Either way, moving on to the next thing. I'm getting hung up on that. As the situation comes back to normal, we see Saint Smers. He is coming back together, and we get a glimpse of his heart, and indeed, it is mechanical. What the hell is going on here? Why is Oda giving this to Saint Smers? We have no clue. This could be a Saint Smers specific thing, or it could be that all the God Knights or some celestial dragons have mechanical hearts as well. We're not really too sure. But people have said that the parallels are running even deeper now between Sanji and Saint Smers. Sommers, he feels like a Sanji opponent, from the twisted love thing to hurting women, and now we find out that this guy's part robot? Yeah, it seems like a Sanji opponent through and through. So when I think about this mechanical heart, the first thing that comes to mind is that maybe this is a remnant from the Void Century, because we heard from Vegapunk himself that the Void Century had technology greater than his own. Maybe this is what it is. Maybe this is just a glimpse at what the Void Century was able to recreate. Maybe this even explains why some of these God Knights are immortal? But that doesn't make sense. Again, it doesn't make sense because we saw the Mark of the Abyss. The Mark of the Abyss is what gives them immortality. Does it also change their organs to mechanical body parts? I don't know. I feel like this is the most strange part about the chapter. Like, where is Oda going with this? Why are we seeing this? I feel like it's building up Saint Smers for something greater. And that sounds crazy given what Saint Smers has been thus far. But who knows, man? Come next chapter, the chapter afterwards, if Emu does run the gauntlet back on Elbaf, maybe we will see Saint Smers in his full potential. So, we'll cut back over to Luffy and Loki. They're chilling with Emu, who is trapped in the ice block, and Luffy is in his old man form. He is asking Loki to bring him food, but Loki tells him to go get it himself. Go to the village yourself and pick up the food. But Luffy, instead of doing that, he turns over to Ragnar, who essentially is like his best friend right now, and he asks Ragnar to get the food for him. Yeah, dude. Luffy, Ragnar, Loki, I love the dynamic here. In a weird way, it reminds me of Luffy and Kid, where Kid also gives Luffy the cold shoulder a lot of the times, but they're also like this. They're kind of like friends. And then Ragnar's like a new gag entirely, which I'm just enjoying. So, while Luffy and Loki are talking to each other, we see that Emu's black shadow body disappears from inside the ice block, and we cut back over to Marie Joie. I think this is important because they specified that this is Emu's black shadow body that disappears. I'm assuming the real Gonko is still trapped in ice. So perhaps, maybe, we could thaw her out, and Brook and Gonko can finally have a good conversation. But that depends on how much time we have before Emu shows back up. So again, we cut over to Marie Joie, and we see something fascinating. The outside of Pangaea Castle and some of the buildings are burned and destroyed. Emu is in the Room of Flowers and calls over to the 5 elders, and Emu, over the Denenmushi, says, 5 elders. The 5 elders say, right here, Emu-sama. And I will admit, whenever I think of the 5 elders, I still have Saturn in my mind because we've had Saturn in the story for like 20 plus years, but now I have to like erase him and just replace him with Garling, and it's so strange. Emu says that Mu will leave the Holy Land for a little while. End of chapter, no break next week. So, first things first, I want to tackle the Holy Land. What the hell is going on here? Just a couple chapters ago, we got a glimpse of Pangaea Castle and the Holy Land, and it looked fine. You know, the skies were clear, the buildings were cool, and it's like, dude, was that a mistake? You know, did Oda and his team forgot to add in the destroyed building and the fires? Or did Marie Joie just get, like, wiped in, like, 2 seconds while Imu was here? I just don't know. It is really odd to speculate on, because we have seen here in Elbaf, throughout this arc, there have been a lot of inconsistencies and or mistakes that do get fixed when the volume does release. So I wonder if seeing a pristine Marie Joie a couple chapters back was just a simple error. Or maybe it was a bad angle, but we did see buildings. We saw buildings in that shot. So I'm not too sure what's happening here. And one thing too, is that because Imu is leaving the Holy Land for a while, I'm assuming the situation at the Holy Land has now been quelled. Maybe Shamrock has dealt with the problem. Maybe the Gorosei also dealt with the problem too, which I think they did. I mean, if the 5 elders are literally chilling by a dead Mushi, I'm assuming the Holy Land is saved. Whether Akainu and the boys did it, or whether the God Knights did it, we don't really know yet. But yeah, hopefully we find out more about Marie Joie's situation next chapter. And as far as Imu goes, Imu is finally leaving Pangaea Castle and that damn flower room. Turns out that they can leave whenever they want. And I just wonder, man, where are they going? Me, myself, and I believe that they are coming to Elbaf, but I have seen some people online saying that, oh, you know, Imu's going somewhere else. You know, they're not coming to Elbaf. And it's like, okay, if they're not going to Elbaf, where then? Like, what would make the most sense? I feel like it makes sense for Imu to go to Elbaf. He told Luffy and Loki that this battle will divide the world. Cut over to the battle. Domi reversi doesn't work. Okay, time to go back home. Like, I don't think that's it. I feel like there's going to be a round 2. And this chapter right here is simply the calm before the storm. Hell, maybe even next chapter, a majority of it will just be us chilling, hanging out, and then end a chapter, boom, Imu shows up again. I feel like that might be the case. I could be wrong. You know, maybe Imu does go somewhere else entirely, but I feel like Elbaf makes the most sense. And, you know, just throwing it back to Saint Smers for a second, if the mission was done, I feel like Saint Smers would simply undo the Abyss Circle and go back home. But no, Sommers is recovering. He's still here. Killing him is still here. I feel like there's going to be like a second awakening, and Imu, when the real body shows up, things are going to get crazy. But of course, again, that is just my own personal opinion. Let me know what you guys think about this chapter down below. It's very short, because a majority of it is mainly just Luffy and Loki versus Imu. And then the latter half was, again, simply just clearing up Elbaf. From the Chopper Domi reversi stuff to Robin and the library with Biblo going MIA. And then, of course, with a little shot of Marie Joie. But again, with that being said, let me know what you guys think about all this down below. Tomorrow or the next day, we will be coming back and doing a comment read-through video. So if you want your comment read, make sure to drop it down below, and I'll catch you guys later. Thanks so much for watching. Peace out, and stay safe, brothers.